You are listening to an Art Media podcast.
So Yael, what's your number?
My number today is $107 million. That's the aggregate funding round of Light. It's a new company, actually not that new. It just came out of stealth last week. It's a company in the physical AI robotics space, and it's symbolic because its founders are both Israeli and Iranian. So it's an Israeli and Iranian founded company. And during a very critical week, let's not say days or hours, right, in the Israel-Iran relationship, these are founders that worked together at Apple before founding Light just 4 years ago. And so really in such tense and monumental times, I think symbolism does have a very big place. And that's my number, 107 mil. Yonatan, what's yours?
I already concede to your number before my number. Mine is 50 billion shekels in exit revenue in 2025. That means that the 400,000 people working in the high-tech industry in Israel, that's roughly 10% of the workforce, have generated 50 billion shekels in just exit revenue. That is the money that went to the employees, a third of which went to the tax authorities in Israel. And this is during a year of intense war, including 12 days of a full zero activation of the Israeli market. I think that is just a phenomenal indication of how the Israeli tech scene continues to deliver. But I have to say, I love your number. So without further ado, let's start the episode.
It is 9 p.m. in a very rainy and windy Tel Aviv.
It is 8 p.m. in a very remote place called Solothurn in Switzerland, where I'm at for the recording. A snowstorm yesterday, but really calm weather today. A couple of numbers that also caught my attention this week in developments. I think for me, the most important one was the decision of the Azeri government to explore investing and buying 30% of Israel's leading desalination company, IDE. Total sum of the deal is going to be $270 million once it concludes. And this is exciting on two accounts. One, it is, again, this proof of the geopolitical realignment. You know, it's India, Ethiopia, Azerbaijan, and the Hellenic alliance, that's Cyprus and Greece, that's taking shape in the day after the war. We spoke about Saudi last week and that not really happening as fast as we may want it to be. I think this is a great alternative, and Azerbaijan is proving to be a wonderful partner. But what caught your attention this week?
So, my week was really about something which at first glance, it seemed like a minor change. The Wix co-founder and president, Nir Zor, sent an email out to all of employees saying that they're going to come back 5 days a week and not the original 4 days a week in the office. And they have a new beautiful campus in a not very central location. And what caught my eye was the amount of discourse it got from all social media. People had a very strong opinion, either for or against. Who knew that, we're talking about Iranian tensions and Venezuelan leaders. And the third next most important thing is, will Wix employees have to go back in the office for 5 full days, and kind of looking at what it means for the rest of the tech industry. It was that big of an issue this week in Israeli tech.
Beyond that, for me, in the last week, the strength of the shekel continues to amaze. 3.14. We started last week. The strong shekel is getting stronger to the point that the chairman of the bank had to reduce the interest rate. And that was well received by parts of the economy, but other parts don't like that as much.
And you're right. It's been a pretty crazy few weeks that we're living through, and everything being so unstable. Is global capital just really attracted to Israel as a predictable bet, even in wartime? Or is there kind of a fundamental infrastructure here that investors are attracted to? It's interesting.
Another topic I'm curious to hear your thoughts about is we started 2026 effectively with a tax increase. It's not marketed to the public as such. It's marketed as a freeze of the tax thresholds. But what it does mean is that Israeli families in the, I would say, top 2 deciles that pay already 90% of the taxes are going to pay, on average, 10,000 shekel extra in taxes this year. So you and I are going to feel that at the tail end of 2026. 2025 was not kind to us with a real tax increase as well. Any thoughts on that before we move to the WYNdex?
The war is absolutely being funded less through kind of some reform and very much on slow pressure on the middle class. And I think that could be sustainable for some time, a short period of time, but we're looking for a policy for the next decade.
Today, buckle up, listeners, viewers. We have Ariel Karlinsky. He's a PhD student in the Center for the Study of Rationality in Hebrew University. That is where two Nobel laureates come from. That's Daniel Kahneman, the late Daniel Kahneman, and Israel Oman, sheibadel lechaim arukim. Ariel Karlinsky's study called Al HaMisim Ve'al HaNiflaot, of miracles and taxes, reference to our Hanukkah proverb, is actually groundbreaking in depicting the three economies of Israel, showing the net contribution of different parts of society and actually showing how the generosity of the mega progressive welfare state that was built in Israel has been, in an extent, hijacked by different parts of the population. So yeah, I agree. I think ultimately numbers need to lead the way here, and Ariel's study and his co-researchers give us that baseline upon which we can have a proper political debate. And I think that's a very strong contribution.
Definitely. And his research really forces us to kind of make a decision of where we stand. I will never, again, say the Israeli economy because his research makes it so blatantly clear that when you say the Israeli economy, it's not very evident who you're speaking about. I'm super excited for this conversation.
Yep.
Okay, so let's get our latest update on the WYNdex. That's the What's Your Number index that tracks the publicly funded Israeli-based or founded companies. So how's the WYNdex looking this week?
Well, we had a tough week. So look who's back. WYNdex bounces back with 5.56% increase on the week, in the green, outperforming both the S&P and the NASDAQ by 4.59% and 4.71% respectively. We've had Elbit, Israeli defense tech giant that doubled its size, Yael, last year, rising to the tune of almost 10% last week. We gave a hint to our listeners, so those of you who listened, there seems to be an upcoming IPO of Israeli Aerospace Industries that was announced earlier today. We saw Mobileye acquiring for $900 million robotics company, humanoid robotics company called Menti Robotics, in what was not well received by the market. That was a $900 million acquisition. The stock actually lost weight, and a lot of criticism of this one because the company saw the founder of Mobileye and one of its biggest shareholders, Amnon Shashua, actually gaining about a third of the exit value of the company. I think we're also going to see with IAI in the public space, there's going to be more opportunities to invest in sort of AAA, big size Israeli defense tech, and we'll see what that does to Elbit. Nova Measurement, Palo Alto Networks, all still going up. Nova up 8.19%, going above and beyond the 11 billion market cap. Clearly on good news on the industry. Nova is our sort of small ASML equivalent in the Netherlands. Monday.com continuing to climb. Lemonade up 6.3%. And today, I think it was like 7% last time I saw. So really a big jump in Lemonade's path forward. Yael, any other thoughts on the green before we go to the reds?
Take us to the reds.
So we see continued negative sentiment, unfortunately, for FIVERR, eToro, and Wix. How do these companies fare with an AI that continues to grow, right? Like, what does FIVERR do? How does it adapt? What does eToro do? That's the sort of massive headwind that these guys are seeing, and it doesn't seem to wane as the year starts. Any thoughts there?
Those are three companies that have not yet figured out how to kind of climb and sustain and prosper with this AI revolution.
So, we're ready for a long play. Today we have with us Ariel Karlinsky. Ariel, thanks for coming on the show. And traditionally, we ask our guests what's their number. So what's yours?
I brought lots of numbers today. First number I'll say is between 80 to 90% of ultra-Orthodox or Haredi households in Israel are dependent on the state.
You know, Ariel, on this podcast, and I know you're very dedicated listener, we're very bullish about the Israeli economy, you know, the robustness of the economy here, the vitality, the horizon. But the truth is really, if you look under the hood, as you do in your research, things aren't that simple. We're not talking exactly about one economy. Is that right?
That's right. So if you take something like, GDP per capita, standard way that we measure how prosperous countries are. Latest World Bank data, 2024, Israel's GDP per capita, about 55,000. That's very high. That's higher than New Zealand, for example. But there are actually several economies. So there's the non-ultra-Orthodox or non-Haredi Jewish economy. That's actually an even more prosperous economy. About 71,000 GDP per capita. So it's higher than France. It's higher than Sweden, actually. But there are two additional economies. Think of them as more even developing economies. That's the Arab economy, and that's the ultra-Orthodox economy, which actually have a GDP per capita closer to something like 26,000, which is in line with Mexico and China. So these are huge gaps. And these different sized pies, together, they form the Israeli economy, which again is absolutely a developed economy, but the gaps between these groups are immense in terms of pure productivity.
So what do you think got us here? Yonatan, you and I have been part of this like competitive startup nation, scale up nation. We know it pretty well, but we're hearing, and we know very well from society and from, living, that we're also developing very much third world pockets within this, the different economies that Ariel is laying out.
To our listeners, Ariel published alongside other researchers a study a couple of months ago. The notion that is, I think, at the core, and Ariel, take us through it, is Israel is still very much, even after the 1985-86 reforms, a very robust, progressive welfare state. So many people aren't even meeting the tax bracket. We have top two deciles paying, what is it now, 85% of the income tax. So walk us through how the generosity of the progressive welfare state ended up in what you refer to as three different economies.
You're absolutely correct about the income tax. And the income tax is heavily featured in, like Israeli financial media, because this is data that is also pretty easy to gather. The Ministry of Finance publishes this report. But as all of us know, I had a receipt right here. I bought coffee today. I not only paid income tax, I also paid VAT. And the gasoline tax here is very high. So all of us pay many more taxes than just income taxes. So just the income taxes, they don't paint the full picture. But actually, households of, let's say, similar sizes, they will actually pay very similar VATs. They will actually pay very similar tax on tobacco or alcohol if they purchase it. What is very different is the income tax. So the income tax in Israel is probably, I think, too progressive in the sense that the lower brackets pay actually nothing. Once you have not a high enough income, and it's also the number of your dependents, so your children, is high enough, and that can actually even be 2 or 3 children, you're already either not paying income taxes at all or paying very few income taxes. And all of these taxes, what they do is they fund the modern Israeli state and welfare state. It's taxpayer-funded healthcare, it's taxpayer-funded education. And when you have groups that are unable or unwilling to increase their productivity, but they are entitled to everything that the modern welfare Israeli state provides, you get huge gaps in what these groups receive versus what they pay for in taxes.
We talk a long time about in the West, thinking about welfare states as something being driven by left-wing economies, and the stuff that you're laying out here is certainly that. But in reality, we've been governed now by right-wing economic policy for, I guess it's been 3 decades. How do you explain that discrepancy?
Wow. So there used to be a pretty right-wing finance minister. His name was Benjamin Netanyahu, present and absent for many years now on economic issues. And actually some of the reforms that he has led, as I said, in 2003 to 2006, were hugely important. It used to be that once you have a certain amount of children, you would get thousands of shekels every month for every child. So people's main occupation was actually, as weird as it sounds, to produce children and actually not work. And that was especially true when it collides with, Pur U'Bu, go and multiply, of extremely religious people, the Haredi community, who had a chance to, do the mitzvah as best as they can and get paid for it. So what happened is that across time, since the 70s, child allowances, so the monthly stipend that you get per child, it used to be only for army veterans, actually. That's what it used to be called, child allowance for army veterans. Kitzbat Yotzei Tzava. A series of decisions by the Supreme Court, and also some political pressure, of course, said that this was discriminatory towards Arabs and ultra-Orthodox. So this changed in the 70s. And in the 70s, all of these groups, which were not entitled to the allowance in the first place, started getting it. And you saw, for example, employment rates of ultra-Orthodox men. It used to be much higher. So people used to work, but they got money for actually not working until these reforms in 2003. And ever since then, actually, because I think Netanyahu got burned pretty hard politically for what he did in 2003, that he decided to not touch this hot potato ever again. So we were left with this sort of right-wing, capitalist, entrepreneurship-driven, highly successful economy on the one hand, and groups that are highly, highly dependent on it. And this weight, it was actually not that big of a weight because the rest of the economy is so incredibly productive. So the bigger the pie, even if you take a large slice of this pie, you still have much left. But now there are other issues on the horizon with demographics.
Yeah, I think it's basically a tale of, if you will, three trains, right? As long as one train drives faster, then it's okay because it can carry all the rest. And I think that's what we had throughout many years. I think demographically, the fact that the sort of net contribution to the market, which is, I think, the innovation of this research that Ariel and his colleagues have come up with. How do you kind of clean it up in a progressive welfare state? How do you know net if a household is contributing or is receiving more in taxes? And if the population that's net negative is growing fastest demographically, then you have a challenge unless the pie keeps on growing really, really fast. And I think the dynamic that we're seeing in the last few years, I was part of an administration. I worked for the president, obviously not for the prime minister in 08 through 2012. There were a lot of reforms in Netanyahu, the second government from Netanyahu. Open skies, that was a big battle with unions in the aerospace industry that got us to, EasyJet, $70 flights that everybody enjoys now. Reform in the ports, reform in the electricity structure of Israel that ended up with Israel kind of number 4 from the bottom in the prices of electricity per kilowatt hour right now, including also obviously the natural gas. So when the government of Israel has the wherewithal and it pushes forward, Netanyahu being prime minister in 2010, 2012, it can do that. And the train drives fast. I think we reached the end of that road.
Ariel mentioned it as well. We're going to kind of double click on what's happening today in the Haredi economy specifically, election year and all. And it's kind of at the heart of the tensions that we're seeing. Ariel, what are you seeing there? And I know you also spoke about this.
Okay, so as I said, employment rates in the Haredi community hit a crater of only about 30%. And these are able-bodied men. Women had even lower, I think, in about 2003. And that's when the reforms that Netanyahu did, heavily reducing child allowances, and basically paying less for unemployment unless you were already employed and for shorter durations. And from then it started to rise. Now, I think back in, I don't remember if it was 2000 and 2005, there was a governmental committee that said, our goal is to increase employment both in the Arab and the Haredi community by at least 60% until 2020. Now, in the Haredi community, what happened was two things that I think no one anticipated. The first thing, and the good thing, is that Haredi women employment rates today are very similar to non-Haredi women. So it's over 80%. And that's including, 6 to 8 children. I have no idea how Haredi women both work and care for 6 to 8 children and another man at the house. That's amazing. But what happened with Haredi men, so Haredi men employment rates increased, but they still haven't reached even the levels that they were before, like the 70s when they were much higher at about 60 to 70%. So they're currently hovering at like 55%. And it does seem that there's this like very sticky ceiling at about 55%. Many possible causes for it. Fear of conscription, for example. You have to be at the yeshiva, at the kollel, in order to not get conscripted. And that's a huge, of course, political issue right now in Israel. The biggest issue, though, and I think where the Israeli government is at fault, in a certain sense, is the educational system. And the education system for Haredi generally is completely unrelated to the modern economy, and for Haredi men even more so. So they don't study English, they don't study math, nothing to do with computers, of course. Even if you want to go to work, if you want to be employed, you will almost always start at a very, very, very low wage. And then you can do a very easy calculation where I either work and I get, 5,000 shekels a month, or I don't work and I rely on all these allowances and benefits and discounts and reductions that by time became very tailor-made to the Haredi community, not explicitly. So there's no law that says if you are ultra-Orthodox, you will pay less in childcare. But it does say something like if the woman is working and the man is not working and you have more than 5 children, you will get heavy discounts. So this is very tailor-made due to the political power of the Haredi parties.
I think it's important, Yael, just to kind of get the bottom line on the net contribution. How much do these households take in benefits and how much do they contribute? Like, give us the kind of raw findings so we know what we're looking at here.
Okay. I always love to talk numbers. So as I said, income tax is very easy to show. Media has done it a bunch of times. And also something like child allowances is very easy to show. And there has been this persistent, let's say, myth coming even from like ultra-Orthodox members of Knesset that say something like, it's true that we don't pay income tax, but we pay a lot of VAT because we have large families and we pay a lot in the supermarket. And also child allowances right now, they're very low. They're like 200 something shekels per child. That's nothing. So we're actually not getting anything from the state. But as I said, what is the modern welfare state? The modern welfare state is actually much more about taxpayer-funded education and taxpayer-funded healthcare. So what we do is for each household in Israel, we know many things about them, whether they're ultra-Orthodox or Arab, where they live, how many children they have, what's their income. So we can calculate directly each and every expenditure from the state, whether it's education or health or public housing or public transportation, and all the taxes that they pay, not only income tax, so income taxes, municipal taxes, VAT, fuel surcharges, whatever you can think of. We also found taxes that we didn't even know existed. So if you take like total taxes, all taxes, the average non-Haredi household pays each month about 14,000 shekels in total taxes. I don't know how to convert this to US dollars because the rate keeps changing. Okay, but that's monthly. Haredi and Arabs, they pay about 5,000 shekels less per month, and this all comes in taxes. On the other hand, if you talk about government expenditure, so how much it costs the state, this particular household, so the average non-Haredi household gets about 8,000 shekels in total expenditure, while Haredi household get about 13,000. So the average Haredi household is already net dependent. But we can actually do it for the entire distribution. And we see that only the top decile of the Haredi community pays more in taxes than they receive back. So 90% of this group is net dependent. If the Haredi community was, 1%, 2%, 4% of the population, many other countries have, of course, groups that are of similar size and similar dependency. But the Haredi community is growing. It's growing fast. It's growing the fastest in the developed world. And the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics projection is that by 2065, it will be about a third of the total population of Israel. So this is completely unsustainable. Haredi household 50 years from now seem to be on a very similar path to what they are now. So this is not just a temporary situation where you invest a lot of money now, and in the future they will produce much more. This, I think, is probably the biggest economic issue that Israel is currently facing, and it will keep being worse as time goes by, unless something pretty drastic changes, especially I think in the education system and in the tax system.
Just to understand, there's a lot of countries around the Western developed world that are right now very overburdened by their kind of welfare infrastructure that is either a thing of the past or just really overburdened. When you look at it from a broad macroeconomic perspective, how unique is this Israeli case?
Transferring income from young or young adults to elderly people for pensions and for health expenditures. And the issue is that the base of the pyramid, the people who work and contribute to the people at the top, the older people, it gets smaller and smaller. So the dependent population in many countries will be defined as like children before working age and the elderly. In Israel, the dependent population is itself an entire population group of actually all ages. And that's absolutely unique. So the Israeli state puts money into education that it knows it will never see back, because these people, even if they will work, they will never pay income taxes. And again, I don't know any situation like this in any other developed country.
Ariel, I think these are great points. One of the arguments that are being made is that when it comes to demographic growth, you go to Italy, that's suffering, significant macroeconomic challenges. And you mentioned France, the pension system, 50% of the GDP is tax or welfare, compared to low 30s in Israel, high 20s in the US. It means that there's nothing left to tax, basically, in those countries. And Italy had its lowest birth rate since 1860 last year. So I think there's a lot we can do, because we do have a demographic challenge. But I think if you look at the Western Hemisphere, there are also huge engines of growth that other economies don't have that allow for Israel to then push forward. The big question is, where do we go from here?
Okay, so Ariel is joining us back. I think he had a power outage. I'm telling you, Yonatan, the winds and rain here are pretty insane. Israeli weather is just as unpredictable as the Israeli economy. Anyway, the third economy, I would say, the three different economies. Ariel, thank you for really pulling through and doing what you can to join us, because I do have one last question, and it is very important to hear for me. I know for Yonatan as well. Your research doesn't really touch upon, it gives you the most comprehensive, maybe unprecedented also look at the numbers, at the facts, looking beyond income tax and so forth, but it doesn't tell us what's fair and kind of like, where do we go from here? What needs to happen? It doesn't say what should change and what should change in a fair way. And I realize this is not an easy question for an economist. It's maybe better for a philosopher. Tap into that and tell me, how do we go from here?
I think there are two important and possible vectors to, turn the corner, perhaps. The first one is taxes. The current tax system is too progressive. The income tax alone, as I said, makes the most of the difference, because different households purchase similar things, actually. So all of us pay VAT, but income taxes is where high income and people with, less children pay the brunt of it, whereas lower brackets don't pay almost anything. It doesn't have to be this way. So in Scandinavian countries, in many other developed countries, robust welfare states too, you actually pay income tax from the first shekel or krona or euro that you earn. You also, by the way, pay income taxes on allowances, on stipends, on direct transfers. Something in Israel is unheard of. Most allowances are tax-free. That alone, I think, will change much of the, at least, economic and political calculus, where you can keep increasing the high income rates because they apply to so few people, in a sense. So it doesn't cause like this mass political issue where it will in other countries if you increase income taxes. And the other thing is education. As I said, what's happening now is that almost none of the justifications for publicly funding education apply to the ultra-Orthodox community, and especially to men. So they study nothing that is relevant to the modern economy. These are people that are very studious, but almost by definition. And then they reach like age 18 or 20 or 25, and they want maybe to go out into the modern labor market, and they don't have the skills to do it. And it's very, very hard to, in 1 year, change what hasn't been done in 12 or 18 years. It's almost impossible. There is a political will by some, by the way, in the ultra-Orthodox community itself, what's called Mamlachti Haredi, which is a similar structure to the non-Haredi but religious schools in Israel, where they will teach everything, but you also get a very extensive religious education. It's a bottom-up phenomena. Some of the politicians do not care for it, but there is growing demand from the community. So I do think there's a bit of a silver lining here where it could happen like in the next 2 years. The issue is that many of the generations that we already have, they're a bit lost because they haven't got this education, and there are always geniuses who are able to do that. But there's a reason that normal education takes 12, 18, 20 years of your life.
Yonatan, what do you think? What's fair?
So I think, to be honest, Israel's at a crossroad. It is faced with a very tough choice. Either get to a new deal, right? Figure out how Arab Israelis have a new contract, ultra-Orthodox, have a new contract. The broader economy becomes more decentralized. The tax structure changes, more municipal taxes, less nationwide taxes. We're at 95-5 right now. 95% of taxes go to Jerusalem, and then they're misrepresented, and then communities don't get the benefit of their tax money. So either we go for a new deal, which I think is the direction we need to go, or we're going to have to break away with a generous, progressive welfare state, because the two together, the data from Ariel's study show, just don't work well. I can tell you ethically sort of where I think we need to go. I think it is a new deal, because I see a lot of value, both in Jewish studies, but also in the sense that this community can contribute to the economy given the right policies. And what we saw in the past, Ariel, I think you will agree, they respond really well to policy and to incentives. And so I think I'm super optimistic. I think we have a 10-year window to get to the New Deal. I wouldn't want us to give up on our welfare state and on the basic solidarity drivers that made Israel what it is.
I absolutely agree. Everybody responds to incentives, and the ultra-Orthodox have shown to respond to incentives. As I said, employment rates used to be higher when they had less of a welfare state to depend on. It grew when they had less of a welfare state to depend on. When policy changed, change is definitely possible. It's a political question. I also absolutely agree about the centralization issue, which is also something Israel is very unique. It's probably the most centralized state, even though the population itself is probably the most heterogeneous. So there's quite a bit of a paradox here as well.
All right, Ariel, I think it's time to thank you and let you find your way home in the storm.
Ariel, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ariel. Okay, that was fun. We had Ariel come back from the cellar there, given the storm. Sorry, I'm away from Israel and I can't commiserate with you guys. I loved your question in the end. I think that's what it's all about, right? We get the baseline, and then where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think that really is kind of what we're going to be fixated on. We have been discussing this for decades, really, like what to do with the non-participation of certain segments of the population, and specifically about the Haredi population. But, it's so interesting how unique the situation in Israel is about, having such a strong left-wing, quote unquote, economic history, but being led by very right-wing economic policies, and where that kind of got stuck or even stopped functioning as left and right and just became status quo. What's next is to be seen.
And the good news, it's an election year. So we began the show with the numbers of the week, and we will end it with the words of the week. Both you and I kind of picked up on Nir Zohar, that is a co-founder of Wix, calling everyone to go back to a 5-day at the office work week, abolishing the acronym WFH that was with us through COVID, the work from home. I mean, here's what he had to say. We're in a moment where our industry is being reshaped by AI. We need to move fast, continue our growth, and the best way to do this is together. Wix has always been at its best when we're around each other, learning, building, laughing, solving things, creating things. I'm really looking forward to bringing that energy back into the office every day. And so to get rid of WFH, you use another acronym, one letter less, which is AI. Your thoughts on that? Do you think this makes sense? Is this narrative? Is this...
I don't think there was one person in Israel that didn't write on X or on LinkedIn exactly what they thought. They personally, individually thought about Nir Zohar's decision. And, he was posting it on social media for a reason. I think he did want to kind of show the Wix leadership's decision full out, transparent, and not kind of garner any rumors. I think it is a good decision. I understand that it's uncomfortable for many, and I understand Wix historically always was a working from office kind of company.
General Omar Bradley has this famous quote that says that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. In that sense, what Nir Zohar shows us, what Wix shows us is that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk culture. I think Nir is making a comment on culture. Whether or not it has to do with AI, I don't buy that. I think it has to do with the culture. Wix is a leader of the Israeli tech industry. I think both thumbs up here, backing up the culture decision led by Wix. All right. I think that's it for today's show. Thank you for tuning into ARC Media's What's Your Number? We hope you found it interesting. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, rate, review, and you know the drill. But most importantly, share it with others who you think will find it interesting. If you want to make suggestions or share your feedback, please reach out to us at whatsyournumber@arcmedia.org.
What's Your Number is an ARC Media podcast. ARC Media's executive producer is Adam James Levine Aredi. Our production manager is Brittany Cohen. Sound and video editing is by Liquid Audio. Our theme music is by Midnight Generation. I'm Yael Wisner-Levy.
I'm Yonatan Adiri. Yael, I hope I see you next week in Tel Aviv. Maybe we can record from the same office even.
Yes, and hopefully, there won't be any power outages.
This podcast offers general business and economic information and is not a comprehensive summary for investment decisions. It does not recommend or solicit any investment strategy or security.